Beneath a quiet forest lies a secret that swallowed an entire community. For years, people walked above it without knowing the ground beneath their feet was hollow, holding the remains of a dream that turned into a grave. It was meant to bring life to a forgotten town, but the mountain had other plans. In the early years of the 20th century, before the highways came and the maps were redrawn, there was a small valley town called Merrow's Hollow. It rested in the shadow of a mountain, surrounded by thick woods and the steady murmur of a shallow river that curved like a silver thread through the trees. The people there lived quiet, honest lives. They knew every neighbor by name, every sound the wind made as it passed through the pines. Life was simple and predictable, which was both its blessing and its curse. As the world beyond their hills began to change, the people of Merrow's Hollow felt left behind. New factories were rising in the cities, trains were connecting distant coasts, and progress seemed to move faster than anyone could understand. The young men spoke of leaving, of chasing opportunity where the smoke from chimneys meant money and motion. The older ones worried that if they went, the town itself might fade. What Merrow's Hollow needed, everyone agreed, was connection, something that could pull them out of isolation and into the new century. That chance came in the form of a tunnel. In 1907, a company called Caldwell and Company proposed to carve a passage straight through the mountain that had long kept the valley apart from the main trade routes. A railway line would run through it, cutting the travel distance between Merrow's Hollow and the industrial towns beyond by half. It would bring goods, jobs, travelers, and new life. For a community that had watched prosperity pass it by, the promise was irresistible. When the engineers arrived, the townspeople gathered at the edge of the forest to watch. Men in starched shirts and felt hats spread maps across makeshift tables, pointing to lines and figures only they could interpret. They talked about rock density, pressure, and angles of descent, but what the people heard was hope. The mountain, which had always been a barrier, was about to become a gateway. Work began in the spring. The first days were filled with the sound of axes cutting through roots and shovels striking earth. Temporary camps went up near the base of the ridge, and families came to watch as the mountain's face was marked with red paint and survey flags. Children played among the wooden crates that held the tools of progress, and old men stood in silence, remembering how many had once said the mountain could never be moved. By summer, the machinery arrived, steam drills, carts, and the sharp smell of oil. The air that had once smelled of pine now carried the metallic scent of work. Dozens of men were hired from nearby towns. Some came for wages, others for the sense of purpose that had been missing in their lives. They worked by lantern light long after sunset, their silhouettes flickering against the orange glow that spilled from the tunnel mouth. Daniel Kerr, the young foreman, became the heart of the project. He was not a man of speeches or arrogance but of action. Each morning he arrived before anyone else, walking along the ridge with a notebook in one hand and a mug of black coffee in the other. He inspected the supports, adjusted ropes, and spoke to his men by name. They trusted him. When accidents happened, and they did, Daniel was always the first inside to help. The men joked that he was part of the mountain now, that he could hear its breathing. The deeper they dug, the darker the air became. Dampness clung to every surface, and the walls glistened like skin in torchlight. The echo of drills and picks created a rhythm that filled the valley above. Even from the town square, people could feel the faint vibration of progress under their feet. It became a strange comfort, that steady hum in the distance, a reminder that something was being built, something permanent. In those early months, the mood in Merrow's Hollow was electric. The tavern stayed open late, the general store doubled its stock, and a sense of purpose spread like light through the town. Women talked about how their children might one day ride the train through the mountain to see the world beyond. For the first time in generations, the future felt close enough to touch. Autumn arrived with crisp mornings and long shadows stretching across the valley. The tunnel had reached nearly a quarter-mile, and Caldwell's engineers were confident they could finish within a year. The newspapers called it a triumph of American engineering. Reporters came to take photographs, men standing proudly with blackened faces, lanterns glowing beside them like stars caught in the rock. The photo appeared in a city paper with a single caption, "Building a future beneath the mountain." But the mountain was not easily conquered. As the weather cooled, small cracks appeared in the outer walls. Timber supports creaked under the strain of weight. One evening, a section of the lower passage gave way, trapping 2 men for hours. They were rescued, shaken but alive, and work resumed the next morning. Caldwell's supervisor called it a minor incident. Daniel called it a warning. When winter came, the air inside turned cold and heavy. Water dripped from the ceiling in a steady rhythm, and frost gathered on the iron tools. The men's breath turned to mist, their hands raw from the damp. Yet they pressed on. They decorated the entrance with lanterns at Christmas, the same way they had at the tavern, as if to remind themselves that light still existed inside the darkness. The townspeople came to watch, bundled in coats and scarves, singing carols while the sound of drills echoed faintly from below. Daniel stood apart from the celebration, staring into the tunnel's black mouth. He couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper they went, the less the mountain wanted them there. He wrote a letter to Caldwell's headquarters requesting more support beams, more safety checks. No one replied. The company had other projects, other profits to chase. Merrow's Hollow was small, and in the eyes of businessmen far away, small things were replaceable. The thaw came early that spring, and with it, the rains. The river swelled and turned brown with mud. The water seeped into the cracks of the earth, whispering down through stone toward the tunnel's deepest chambers. The men worked through it, coughing in the damp air, lighting extra lamps to cut through the fog that drifted inside. Daniel made his rounds every hour, tapping the walls, listening for sounds that didn't belong. One night, as he walked alone through the narrow corridor, he heard it, a deep, distant groan that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The lamps flickered. A small pebble fell from above, landing at his feet. He turned back toward the entrance, heart pounding. When he stepped outside, the wind was howling through the valley. Rain lashed against his coat. He looked up at the ridge, at the dark line where rock met sky, and he thought he saw the faintest tremor ripple through it. He went home soaked and sleepless. In his journal that night, he wrote, "The mountain is breathing heavier now." The next morning, work continued as always. The men sang as they carried their tools inside. The sound of drills echoed once more through the valley. The town awoke to the familiar rhythm of progress. And beneath their feet, the mountain listened. The sound of the drills became the heartbeat of Merrow's Hollow. From sunrise until long after dark, the steady rhythm of metal against stone echoed through the valley like a distant drum. The people grew used to it, even comforted by it. Mothers rocked their children to sleep to the faint hum that rolled out of the mountain each night. It was the sound of work, of survival, of faith in a future that still had to be carved from the earth. Inside the tunnel, the air was heavy and alive. It smelled of dust, sweat, and burning oil. Lanterns hung from wooden beams, their flames swaying with every vibration. Shadows moved across the wet walls like living things. The deeper the men went, the more the mountain seemed to close around them. Conversations became shorter, breaths slower. Yet none of them stopped. They were part of something larger than themselves, and that thought carried them through the long, suffocating hours. Daniel Kerr spent most of his days inside now. He no longer felt the need to stand at the entrance and look toward the sky. The sun was for others. His world had become the rhythm of picks, the flicker of lamps, the echo of his own footsteps. Each time he entered the tunnel, he felt the mountain pressing closer, as if it were studying him. The men joked that he talked to the stone, and sometimes he did. He would run his hands along the walls and whisper measurements, directions, small reassurances. In a place where light could not reach, words had a strange power. By late spring, the tunnel stretched nearly 3/4 of a mile. The town's pride had never been higher. Caldwell and Company sent reporters to document the progress, and the workers posed for photographs, covered in soot and smiling despite their exhaustion. The newspapers called it a miracle of modern ambition. But miracles always come with a cost. The first signs of trouble were small. A tool left on the ground would tremble without anyone touching it. A lantern flame would suddenly bend sideways, though no wind passed through. Daniel noticed it before anyone else. He said nothing, only started marking the walls with chalk each morning, small white lines that grew more crooked as the days went by. He began requesting more support beams, thicker wood, stronger bolts. Caldwell's office responded with letters full of patience and delay. They were over budget, they said. Every project had risks. By midsummer, the air inside grew hotter, almost suffocating. The men worked shirtless, their skin shining with sweat, lungs burning with every breath. They dug through layers of shale and limestone, deeper into the core. Some swore they could hear water moving under the rock. Others said it wasn't water at all, but something breathing. The joke spread through the camp like a nervous prayer. The mountain is alive, they said, and it's listening. One afternoon, a section of the tunnel roof gave way. It wasn't a full collapse, just enough to send dust and small stones raining down. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. The mountain was warning them. Daniel ordered the men out, inspected the damage, and spent the night reinforcing the beams himself. The next morning, work continued as if nothing had happened. That was the way of things. The summer heat baked the valley until even the river ran low and sluggish. The men drank from tin cups and wiped salt from their faces. Blisters covered their hands. When the whistle blew each evening, they walked home silently, eyes down, too tired for conversation. The tunnel was consuming them, one swing at a time. Margaret Hale, the tavern owner, noticed the change first. Her bar, once filled with laughter and music, had gone quiet. The men drank faster now, their conversations shorter. Some stared at the floor, hearing the echo of drills in their heads even after leaving work. Others began to dream of the tunnel, dreams of endless corridors and distant knocking. She started closing early, saying the mountain didn't like noise after dark. Daniel stopped visiting altogether. He spent his nights in the small office near the tunnel entrance, sleeping beside the ledgers and maps. His journal filled with notes, not of progress, but of unease. The ground feels hollow, one entry read. The supports creak even when no one touches them. Sometimes I think I hear voices calling my name. One night in August, he woke to the sound of a bell. It came from inside the tunnel, a faint metallic ring echoing from the depths. He thought at first it was a dream. When it came again, he grabbed his lantern and walked to the entrance. The air was still. The lamps along the walls flickered softly. He called out, but no one answered. The sound didn't repeat. In the morning, he told no one. By early autumn, Caldwell's investors grew impatient. The project was behind schedule, and rumors of instability had reached the newspapers. A new supervisor was sent from the city, a tall man named Gregory Finch, polished and confident, with little patience for what he called miners' fears. He ordered the crews to increase their shifts, double their pace, and stop wasting time on superstitions. Daniel protested, but Finch outranked him. The drills screamed louder that week than they ever had before. Sparks flew, dust filled the air, and the temperature inside rose like the breath of a furnace. The walls shook in rhythm with the machines. Some men quit, refusing to go back inside. Others stayed, afraid of losing their pay. Then came the storm. It started with thunder rolling across the ridge and rain hitting the tents like fists. The river swelled again, turning brown with silt. Lightning cracked through the clouds, illuminating the mouth of the tunnel like an open wound. Inside, the lamps flickered. The supports groaned. Daniel and Finch argued near the entrance, one shouting to stop, the other shouting to continue. The wind drowned their words. A tremor ran through the ground, stronger than before. Buckets rattled, beams shifted. Deep within the tunnel came a low rumble that grew louder with every second. The men froze. Dust fell from above like snow. Someone screamed for everyone to run. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. Silence. They waited, hearts pounding, eyes on the dark. When nothing else happened, Finch laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. He ordered the men back to work. Daniel stood still, his eyes fixed on the mountain. He could feel it breathing again, slow and patient, as if waiting for them to take one more step too far. He turned to Finch and said quietly, "You just woke it up." Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the mountain listened. The morning after the storm, the air felt wrong. It was colder, heavier, as if the valley itself had been drained of something vital. The workers arrived early, shovels and lanterns in hand, but they spoke little. The mountain loomed above them, silent and wet, rainwater still dripping from its edges. Daniel stood at the entrance, staring into the darkness that seemed deeper than before. The air that came from the tunnel carried a strange metallic taste, like rust and ash. He felt it in his throat, a quiet warning he couldn't quite name. Finch arrived moments later, coat spotless, boots polished despite the mud. He clapped Daniel on the shoulder and told him to open the line again. "Progress waits for no man," he said. They relit the lamps. One by one, the men filed inside. The deeper they went, the more the light seemed to vanish faster than usual. The walls absorbed it, turning everything into shades of black and gray. The tunnel felt narrower. The sound of boots and tools echoed louder, bouncing in unnatural ways. By noon, they had reached the far end of the excavation site. The drills started up again, piercing the thick silence. Dust filled the air, swirling in pale clouds. Daniel checked the new support beams, running his hand along the wood. The vibration felt different, not just from the drills but from something else, a pulse, faint but steady. He looked at the men, their faces slick with sweat, eyes tired and unfocused. He almost told them to stop. He almost did. At 1:17 p.m., the mountain exhaled. It began with a deep rumble, low enough that it felt more than heard. The floor shifted, a slow wave rolling through the rock. Tools rattled. A lantern fell and shattered, spilling flame into the dust. The air turned thick, choking. Then came the crack, a single sharp sound that split the world in half. The ceiling buckled. Stone and timber exploded downward. The light disappeared in an instant, replaced by screams and the deafening roar of collapse. Men ran, stumbling over one another, their shouts lost in the noise. Daniel grabbed two workers and pushed them toward the exit, shouting to follow the air. He could feel the pressure changing, the mountain closing its throat. The first section went down in seconds. The second followed like dominoes. Somewhere behind them, Finch was shouting orders no one could hear. Dust filled every space, blinding and suffocating. The lanterns went out one by one until there was only black. Daniel felt his way along the wall, coughing, lungs full of grit. He could hear men crying in the dark, calling names, praying. He reached a small alcove where the wall curved and shoved one man through a narrow gap between fallen beams. "Go," he said, though his voice barely made a sound. Another shock tore through the ground, and the wall to his left crumbled. He dove forward as stone crashed where he had been standing. Outside, the valley shook. Birds rose in a cloud from the trees. The river frothed with mud and silt. The entrance to the tunnel groaned, then spat out a cloud of dust so thick it turned the sky gray. Workers who had been outside dropped their tools and ran toward it, shouting for their friends. The earth trembled, then stilled. Inside, Daniel lay pinned under a beam. His lantern was gone. He could see nothing. The air was thin, every breath a fight. Around him came faint sounds, coughing, groaning, a single voice whispering a prayer. Somewhere farther back, the rock still shifted, small stones trickling down like rain. He tried to move, but couldn't. The weight held him fast. He thought of the town above, of Margaret's tavern and the laughter that once filled it. He thought of the river and how it always kept moving, no matter what stood in its way. He whispered to the mountain then, half in anger, half in surrender, "You win." Hours passed. No one knows how long exactly. Those who survived said time lost meaning in the dark. Some dug with their bare hands until their nails broke. Others just waited, listening to the faint rhythm of their own hearts against the stone. It was well past nightfall when the first rescue team reached the mouth of the tunnel. The air that poured out was hot and sour. Men tied cloth around their faces and crawled inside with ropes and picks. They found the first survivors near the halfway point, disoriented, bleeding, but alive. One of them, barely conscious, kept repeating Daniel's name. They followed the sound of his voice deeper until it faded. They reached the collapsed chamber by dawn. What they saw stopped them cold. The walls had folded inward, twisted as if the mountain itself had clenched its fist. Iron supports bent like straw. There were no flames, no open fires, just the smell of earth and the faint hiss of escaping air. They worked for 3 days, pulling out bodies one by one. Some were found holding each other. Others still had tools in hand. Daniel Kerr was not among them. They found his notebook though, pages soaked through, ink smeared beyond reading. Only one line was still visible, written near the end: "The mountain breathes when we go too deep." When the last of the bodies was brought out, Caldwell and Company sent a telegram expressing their condolences and declaring the project closed. The remaining entrance was sealed with brick and concrete. No one was allowed near it again. For weeks, the valley smelled of dust and grief. The people of Merrow's Hollow buried their dead under the same trees that had once echoed with the sound of drills. The town that had dreamed of connection fell silent once more. The bridge between hope and ruin had been buried under stone. And beneath it all, the mountain rested, patient, eternal, indifferent. When the noise stopped, Merrow's Hollow changed forever. The valley that had once pulsed with sound now felt hollow in a different way. No one spoke for days. Smoke and dust still lingered in the air, carrying the faint smell of metal and oil. The tunnel entrance was silent, just a dark wound carved into the mountain, rimmed with broken beams and scattered tools. Families stood at the edge of the work site, waiting for names that never came. The rescuers brought out bodies wrapped in canvas, carried on makeshift stretchers through the mud. Each one was laid in a line beside the river where the water ran brown. Women wept quietly, holding scarves over their mouths. Children didn't understand why no one told them to go home. For the first time in years, the mountain made no sound. No hammers, no drills, no laughter from the camps. Only the wind passing through the pines, whispering over the graves. Daniel Kerr was never found. His absence became a ghost in every conversation. Men who had worked beside him left offerings near the sealed entrance: a pickaxe, a helmet, a small cross carved from wood. Margaret Hale lit a lantern every night at her tavern window, facing the mountain, until the flame went out one evening on its own. Caldwell and Company sent word that the project was officially closed. Their telegram was brief, full of words like unavoidable, unforeseen, and condolences. They sent no one to help rebuild, no one to stay. Within weeks, the remaining crew packed their belongings and left. The town's brief surge of prosperity vanished as quickly as it had arrived. The general store ran out of supplies and closed. The tavern's laughter faded into quiet drinking and then into silence. The tracks that were meant to connect Merrow's Hollow to the world rusted in the rain before they were ever used. The town returned to what it had been before, small, isolated, forgotten, but something fundamental had changed. People began to leave. The first to go were the miners' families, heading west in search of work. Then the farmers followed, selling land for barely enough to survive. Within a year, half the houses stood empty. Weeds grew over the road. The church bell, once rung for weddings and celebrations, now tolled only for funerals. Margaret stayed longer than most. She couldn't bring herself to leave the valley that had taken everything from her. Each morning she swept the porch of her tavern even when no one came. Sometimes she thought she heard voices carried on the wind from the mountain, faint, like laughter half remembered. She would pause, turn toward the ridge, and whisper a quiet greeting, as if answering a friend who had never really gone. By the next decade, maps stopped showing Merrow's Hollow altogether. The forest began reclaiming what was left. Roofs collapsed under snow. Wooden fences sank into the earth. The river, unchanged, continued its patient curve around the valley, washing away traces of roads and foundations. Travelers passing through the region sometimes spoke of ruins hidden deep in the woods: a handful of houses, a rusted rail, a hollow tunnel mouth sealed by stone. Some said they felt a chill standing near it, as if the air itself remembered. Others said they heard whispers when the wind moved through the trees. No one stayed long enough to find out. Time softened everything. The tragedy became a rumor, the rumor became a story, and the story faded into myth. The name Merrow's Hollow was spoken only in old letters and yellowed newspapers. The mountain, patient and unchanging, watched it all quietly, its ridges overgrown with moss and its heart undisturbed. Yet sometimes, when the rain falls just right and the fog gathers low in the valley, the earth gives a faint sigh. Locals say it sounds like breath moving through stone. They call it the mountain remembering. For nearly a century, The valley lay silent. The name Merrow's Hollow disappeared from maps, its letters replaced by blank green where forests grew thick again. The river changed course slightly, eating away at the banks where the town once stood. Every trace of the people who lived there, of their laughter and labor, vanished beneath soil and time. The mountain stood unchanged, patient, watchful, unmoved. But the earth never forgets entirely. In the spring of 2019, a small group of explorers from a local historical society set out to document forgotten mining routes in western Pennsylvania. They weren't looking for Merrow's Hollow. Most of them had never even heard the name. They followed old survey lines, moving through dense trees and muddy paths, tracing the ghost of a railroad that had never been completed. After a long climb through wet pine and undergrowth, they found something strange, a ridge that seemed unnaturally smooth, as if carved by human hands. Moss-covered timbers protruded from the ground. And at the base of the slope, almost completely buried under decades of leaves and roots, there was a hollow space, a void that swallowed their flashlight beams whole. They had found it. The tunnel mouth was smaller than expected, more a scar than an entrance. Thick roots hung like curtains over the stone arch inside. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of wet metal and earth. A faint breeze moved through, steady and rhythmic, as if the mountain was still breathing after all those years. They entered carefully, stepping over fallen beams and rusted tools. The floor was damp, and the walls glistened with moisture. Graffiti from an earlier era marked some sections. Names, dates, simple carvings of crosses and initials. The explorers' flashlights cut through darkness that had not been disturbed in generations. A few hundred feet in, they found the remains of old lanterns, their glass shattered but still resting neatly in a line. One of them shone light over a rusted wheelbarrow filled with stone, frozen mid-motion. There were no human remains, no bones, no artifacts of the dead, only the work itself, preserved in silence. Farther inside, the tunnel widened briefly, forming a small chamber. The air felt heavier there. The ceiling showed black scorch marks, and fragments of timber lay splintered in every direction. The ground was uneven, a mix of rock, soil, and something else, compacted debris, hardened by time and pressure. In one corner, half buried beneath stone, a member of the team noticed a small object glinting faintly in the beam of his flashlight. He knelt and brushed away the dirt. It was a thin metal clasp, holding together the remains of what had once been a notebook. The pages were gone, long dissolved by moisture, but the cover still bore faint impressions of handwriting. Under the right light, one line could still be seen, pressed into the leather so deeply that even time couldn't erase it. "The mountain breathes when we go too deep." They didn't speak for a long while. The air felt different, charged, as if the place itself was listening again. One of the explorers, a woman named Elise Grant, recorded the moment on camera. Her voice was hushed as she spoke into the microphone, describing the chamber, the carvings, the note. "It's like they're still here," she whispered. When they emerged from the tunnel, the sun had already begun to set. The forest was quiet, the air golden and cool. The ridge behind them looked peaceful, untouched. But to those who had entered, the valley no longer felt empty. It felt alive, filled with memory, weight, and breath. Their discovery made local news briefly. A few historians mentioned the lost town, the failed railway, and the tragedy that buried it. There was talk of preservation, of marking the site with a plaque. But the forest grew thick again, and the valley, true to its nature, began to close around the entrance once more. Today, only a few know where to find it. Most who pass through the area see nothing but trees and hear nothing but the wind. Yet those who stop, who listen closely, sometimes notice something else, a faint, slow rhythm rising from beneath their feet. They say it sounds like breath. And if you follow the river at dawn, through the fog and the echo of birds, you might find where the mountain exhales. You might stand where Daniel Kerr once stood, where hope and earth collided, and where the memory of an entire town still waits in the dark. Not every story stays buried. Some continue to breathe long after everyone has forgotten their names. Sometimes, history doesn't disappear, it just waits to be found again. If this story moved you, tell me what you think still lies buried beneath the forest. Do you believe the mountain truly remembers? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to keep uncovering the forgotten stories that built America, subscribe so you don't miss what we find next.